teleSUR English present a new episode of China Now, Huawei Media's production that showcases the culture, technology, and politics of the Asian giant. These first segments dive into different spy cases from story of Leung Cheng-yun, who received life imprisonment for carrying out espionage activities against China, to U.S. internet viruses used for cyber attack against Chinese education centers. We'll also learn more about key diplomatic events taking place during the past weeks, including the visit of the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to China, among others. Let's see.
China Current is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to China Currents. I'm Chris. We have covered a lot of spy stories lately, and just as we thought it's over, on September 11th, the Ministry of State Security revealed another spy case. And for the most interesting part, it's actually an old case happened in May. According to the official announcement, on May 15th, the Suzhou Intermediate People's Court in Jiangsu Province sentenced Leung Cheng-yun, an American spy, to life imprisonment for espionage. In addition to life sentence, he has been deprived of political rights for life, and his personal property worth $500,000 has been confiscated. Leung Cheng-yun was referred to as a veteran spy by the Ministry of State Security, and unlike the previous spy cases, which involved stealing confidential information in China, for the past 30 years, Leung was primarily operating in the United States. According to the news release, Leung Cheng-yun was born in Hong Kong in 1945. In the 1980s, Leung immigrated to the United States and opened a restaurant. During this period, he was approached by CIA agents and recruited him to become an asset. His job was relatively at low risk since he was primarily based in the States. Wait a second, so the United States recruited a Hong Kong immigrant in homeland to spy on China? I mean, it sounds a little bit puzzling. How does this thing even work? The answer is through the overseas Chinese community. Shortly after Leung was recruited, the CIA helped Leung Cheng-yun secure leadership positions, including president, honorary president, and chairman in multiple overseas Chinese associations through donations. They also worked to craft a false image of him as a patriotic philanthropist. As a prominent figure in the overseas Chinese community, Leung was able to get close to Chinese diplomats and gather intelligence. He was also responsible for surveilling overseas Chinese living and studying in the United States. Leung was decorated for his spying activities before the COVID pandemic. If things went on as usual, there would be no chance for Leung to be arrested by the Chinese authority since he merely operates in the United States. But then there comes COVID. The COVID outbreak made it hard for the CIA to get intelligence from China, as its usual intelligence network were all cut out. Leung was then ordered to go to China in person to get intelligence. Since his arrival in late 2020, Leung was involved in a variety of espionage and intelligence activities against China. But this time, it was fully exposed to the Chinese anti-espionage agency. He was then arrested. After a thorough investigation, national security agencies obtained a series of evidence of Leung Cheng-yun's espionage activities. He was apprehended through legal measures and subsequently handed over to the judicial authorities. A life imprisonment, that is what he got for espionage. This capture marks a significant achievement for China's national security efforts, shedding light on the complex and evolving nature of international espionage activities. Next up, let's turn to the U.S. espionage activities on the internet. On September 14th, Chinese state media disclosed that the United States is utilizing computer viruses to infect internet servers belonging to its allies for the purpose of launching cyber attacks against Chinese education institutions. One of the primary targets of these cyber attacks is Northwestern Polytechnical University, a Chinese university renowned for its advancement in aerospace engineering research. NPU has reportedly been cyber-attacked by a computer virus called Second Date. Investigations conducted by the National Computer Virus Emergency Response Center and Chinese internet security company 360 have successfully detected the attack was committed by the Office of Tailored Access Operations under the Data Reconnaissance Bureau of Information Department of the National Security Agency. According to Du Zhenghua, a senior engineer at CVERC, the NSA has strategically implanted the second date virus into a significant number of network servers located in allied countries, including Germany, Japan, South Korea, and India. These compromised servers function as intermediaries, enabling the virus to clandestinely monitor, intercept, and manipulate specific network sessions. The full extent of the impact caused by these viruses on the network security of the countries hosting the compromised servers remains uncertain at present. Next up, on September 10th, Chinese Premier Li Qiang held a talk with US President Joe Biden at a G20 summit in New Delhi. During this dialogue, Li stressed that Chinese development is not a challenge to the US. Biden, in response, said US will not hinder China's economic growth. After the meeting with Li, President Biden spoke at a subsequent press conference in Vietnam. In his speech, Biden referred to China's economic situation as a crisis, suggested that it has made China less likely to reunite with Taiwan Island by force. Chinese Foreign Ministry downplayed the G20 summit in its regular press briefing, only stating that Li had a brief talk with Biden. The ministry also criticized the attempt of foreign interference in the Taiwan issue. Yet, beyond official statements, a short clip of Biden's Vietnam address went viral on Chinese internet. In this clip, Biden quoted the famous war comedy film Good Morning Vietnam in his statements, trying to lighten the atmosphere. He also gave a redundant, irrelevant speech about the Third World and Southern Hemisphere until his microphone was cut off by an aide. President Biden seems suffering from Alzheimer's, a Chinese netizen's comment. The G20 summit was actually not the most important diplomatic event happened last week. Next up, on September 13th, Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Venezuelan counterpart Nicolas Maduro held talks in Beijing, announcing the elevation of China-Venezuela relations to an all-weather strategic partnership, further strengthening cooperation in various areas, including energy, finance, trade, investment, mining, agriculture, infrastructure, telecommunication, and the digital economy. This signifies a remarkable milestone in the diplomatic ties between China and Venezuela. Previously, only countries like Pakistan and Belarus had managed to establish comparable relationships with China. Venezuela also reaffirmed its keen interest in becoming a member of the BRICS nations, emphasizing its role as a dependable energy supplier with the world's largest oil reserves. China, as the world's largest manufacturing country, warmly welcomed Venezuela's proactive intention. Next up, the Chinese government has announced new penalties for providers of unlicensed after-school tutoring as part of an ongoing crackdown on the country's massive private education industry. According to new rules published by the Chinese Ministry of Education on September 12th, unlicensed tutoring providers could face fines of up to 100,000 yuan, along with other punishment if caught operating illegally. The strict new measures will take effect in mid-October and are the latest move in China's efforts to reform the education sector. In 2021, China's President Xi Jinping directed a major overhaul of the education system in the country, known as the Double Reduction Policy. The reforms banned tutoring in core academic subjects on weekends and holidays, capped fees, and required all tutoring companies to be licensed. While more than 100,000 providers have been licensed under the new system, many continue to operate illegally. The strict rules are welcomed by most netizens, many of whom sympathize with the hyper-competitive environment in the education sector and hope that regulating private tutoring will give children more free time after school. Next up, let's turn to the Chinese economy. In an announcement made on September 13th, Huawei and Xiaomi have declared that they have reached a global patent cross-licensed agreement covering communication technologies, including 5G. A patent cross-license agreement typically refers to a mutual permission granted by parties holding patents to use each other's patented technologies. In addition to Xiaomi, Huawei has accumulated nearly 200 bilateral licensing agreements, and over 350 companies have obtained Huawei's patent licenses through patent pools. In 2022 alone, 29 companies from regions including China, the United States, Europe, Japan, and South Korea signed bilateral agreements with Huawei and obtained paid licenses for Huawei's patents. According to reports, Among the top 10 companies with the most valid global patents families for 5G standards, 5 are Chinese enterprises. Huawei ranks first with a 14.59% share of valid patent families, followed closely by Qualcomm and Samsung with 10.04% and 8.8% respectively. Xiaomi enters the global top 10 for the first time with a 4.1% share of the valid patent families, ranking 10th. Huawei is currently the company with most accumulated authorized patents in China, surpassing 47,000 valid patents. In the United States, Huawei has accumulated over 20,000 authorized patents, and in Europe, the number stands at approximately 15,000 authorized patents. Huawei has ranked first globally in terms of patent cooperation treaty applications for 5 consecutive years. Behind this abundance of patents lies massive investment in research and development. In 2022, Huawei's R&D expenditure reached 161.5 billion Chinese yuan, accounting for 25.1% of its annual revenue. The accumulated R&D expenditure over the past decade has exceeded 977.3 billion Chinese yuan. As of the end of 2022, Huawei's R&D staff exceeded 114,000, accounting for 55.4% of its total workforce. Next up, on September 14th, Beijing Authority announced the city's second batch of affordable housing construction planned for 2023. The plan includes 49 new projects totaling 62,000 affordable housing units. The 49 planned new projects include 37 that are scheduled to start construction this year and 12 that are being held in reserve. Of the 37 projects slated to start this year, 29 are rental housing projects involving 16,000 units, and 8 are property ownership housing projects involving 26,000 units, all of which are designated as resettlement housing. Last but not least, let's take a look at the Asian Games. On September 8th, the torch relay of the 19th Asian Games started in Hangzhou, China. A total of 2,023 torchbearers from different countries will pass on the torch. Large crowds gather along the routes of the relay to cheer for each torchbearer. In addition to the torch relay, the fabulous light show in Hangzhou City also caught great attention on the Chinese internet. Plenty of videos about lights straight up in the sky went viral on Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok. Netizens are joking even gods in heaven would have known that Hangzhou is hosting these Asian Games. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts and comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. And Chris, looking forward to hearing from you and see you next time.
We'll go for a very short break, but we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to China Now. This second segment discusses the breakthrough that have been made in the path toward the next generation of semiconductors. Later on, we'll learn more on the state of infrastructure in China and people's perception regarding this topic. Let's see.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is Threshold in China. Just as Huawei has left the world in a frenzy with its latest device, Chinese scientists are making remarkable breakthroughs on the next generation of semiconductors. A breakthrough in the production of a new 2D material is set to pave the way for the transition to next-generation semiconductors. Chinese scientists have managed to use the new semiconductor material to produce 12-inch wafers. Currently, silicon chips, which are the foundation of our electronic devices, are facing challenges as the device size becomes smaller and smaller. The scientists discovered that as these silicon transistors get thinner, they struggle to control voltage properly. This means that even when the device is not in use, it still consumes electricity, leading into increased energy cost and heat generation. But here is where the breakthrough comes in. The researchers from Peking University and the Songshan Lake Materials Laboratory have succeeded in creating new materials. and produced 12-inch wafers using these novel semiconductor materials at a low cost. They focus on developing 2D materials which are incredibly thin, consisting of just a single layer of atoms. In fact, some 2D materials are considered an essential material system for an integrated circuit of 1 nanometer and smaller. They are also recognized by the industry as being capable of continuing or even beyond the Moore's law, where the number of transistors in an integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years. For example, scientists said a transistor built from a single layer of molybdenum disulfide, a typical 2D material, with a thickness of about 1 nanometer, outperformed the one made with the same thickness of silicon many times. These materials possess great semiconductor properties that can potentially solve the issues faced by silicon chips. Although more work is needed to turn them into functional chips, they have the potential to complement silicon chips in the future. However, manufacturing these 2D material wafers wasn't an easy task. There are 2 obstacles: producing big enough wafers and producing them fast. Over 60% of existing chip market relies on 12-inch wafers. Traditionally, wafers are grown using a method called point-to-phase, but as the size of wafer increased, it becomes difficult to distribute the source materials uniformly within the furnace, resulting in lower quality wafers. A Chinese scientist developed a new approach called face-to-face feed. They use special materials as elemental source and achieve a consistent and abundant supplies of precursors within the furnace. This breakthrough allowed them to produce larger 12-inch wafers, which are commonly used in the industry. To make things even better, the researchers came up with a modular growth strategy that enabled the batch production of these 2D material wafers. Each model contained its own unit supply and allowed for robust individual wafer growth. By stacking these modules together, they were able to produce large 12-inch wafers in batches. Leading semiconductor companies such as TSMC, Intel, and Samsung are investing heavily in research and development to explore and optimize the use of these 2D materials alongside silicon-based technologies. China, with the support of the National Nature Science Foundation, is also prioritizing the research and development of these technologies. While some Chinese scientists are making the material even thinner, others are trying to replace the use of silicon altogether. The new candidate is gallium oxide, which the US has tried to ban from China along with other advanced semiconductors, stating national security concerns. Gallium oxide is used in areas such as communications, radar, aerospace, high-speed trains, and electric vehicles. It offers significant performance advantages over other widely used materials in high voltage resistance, smaller size, and less energy consumption in power transmission. However, it has gained a reputation for being quite challenging to process. A team of researchers led by Yang Deren have developed an approach that has yielded impressive results. In August, the team produced 4-inch wafers. This is equivalent to the current maximum commercial wafer size. This is a considerable improvement from their previous achievement of 2-inch wafers made of the previous year. Gallium oxide, unlike other materials, can form single crystals by solidifying from a melt at standard atmospheric pressure. In countries like Japan and the US, a commonly used modeling method requires a significant amount of iridium to make the crucible, which is a container that holds materials during high-temperature processes. The crucible acts as a controlled environment where the components, including gallium oxide, are melted and solidified to form the desired structure or crystals. However, the conventional method demands a large quantity of iridium, making it expensive. For instance, a 4-inch gallium oxide crucible would need at least 5 kilograms of iridium. To put it into perspective, iridium is nearly 3 times more expensive than gold. Yang's team produces a casting method that significantly reduces iridium usage by 80% and cut down the cost of production. This alternative process is also relatively simple and shorter in duration. Notably, a Beijing-based private firm, MIG Semiconductor Company, successfully produced 4-inch gallium oxide wafers in December 2022. The company is also building China's first integral production line combining crystal growth, processing, and performance testing. The construction is expected to be completed by the end of this year. These exciting developments bring us closer to more efficient and cost-effective semiconductor materials based on gallium oxide. We can expect to see a wave of amazing gadgets coming from Chinese brands, even under US sanctions in the future. Huawei's latest phone is just the beginning of what is to come. And that is all for today's Threshold. As always, please let us know if you like this news section on science and technology in China, and we will do more in the future.
Welcome to Overlap. I'm Walter Smolarek, joined by Albert Wang. Today we're going to be talking about infrastructure. So Albert, I wanted to start by asking you a question. What's public opinion like in China about the state of infrastructure? Are people satisfied with it? Are there, for instance, blackouts or flooding very frequently? What's the state of infrastructure and how do people feel about it?
That's a very big question. China is famous of building infrastructures effectively and efficiently, but I cannot just tell you that the Chinese people think our infrastructure is like, it is so good, we're so proud of it. That's not objective. Well, first of all, most of the Chinese people are like, certainly we're proud of our infrastructure and we're developing very fast comparing to like 40 years ago. China now has the longest railroad system in the world, a highway system, and we have 14 of the top 20 ports in the world in terms of cargo throughput. In 1990, there was no subway in Shanghai, but now the Shanghai Metro is more than 831 kilometers, #1 in the world. With roads, like people can buy more cars, transport more goods, and people can travel to different cities to do business. Tourism boosts. When we talk about infrastructure, we are not just dealing with the roads. We are like talking everything happening on it. But it doesn't mean that we're satisfied. We still want to make it better. And China's terrain condition is very complex. We have to build infrastructure in different environments. So Chinese companies developed very advanced high-tech skills on designing and constructing. So we can also actually help other countries build their infrastructure. After all, they all contribute to the economy. Well, for the question about how often do we have a blackout and city floods in China in recent years, the simple answer is that we still have it, but not very often. When I was a kid, we had those problems very often. Now it is less and less. The thing is that cities are combinations of many issues, and power supply is among the top of the list. The global natural environment is changing rapidly with hotter summers and colder winters. People need air conditioning. Factories and shops need electricity to run businesses. New energy vehicles need to power up. In order to ensure the power supply, China has also launched a mega infrastructure project called West to East Power Transmission. The western part of China is less populated, but has rich natural resources of solar, wind, and coal. We need to transmit the excesses, electricity from the west to the east through the power grid. However, I have to say, cities are developing way too fast. We have done a lot, but we still have power problems. Because the whole business of electricity is tricky. However, the climate is changing so fast in recent years. For example, Beijing's temperature had peaked to 104 Fahrenheit this summer. We are breaking the record almost every single day. It is almost impossible for the power system to counter the unpredictables. What's more, these achievements have been accomplished while making every effort to ensure people's basic need. On August 14, 2022, Sichuan province ran into a power shortage. So the provincial government gave an order to shut down all the industrial facilities and ensure the people's daily demand. From time to time, you need to make choice between economic development and the livelihood of the people. It is not simple because shutting down factories also means the rise of unemployment. So it is not one decision to be made. There are lots of math and statistics to be done. Therefore, China's infrastructure is good, but it doesn't mean we can keep all the natural crises away. On July 20th, the city of Zhengzhou experienced a historical heavy rain, and the flooding caused more than 300 deaths and over 50 missing, and affected 14.5 million people around the Henan province. So the only thing I can say is that the Chinese government will always make a move. Okay, I think I have said too much. So what about the situation in the US? What do the US people see the infrastructure in the US?
Well, I think it's one of the most common thing that people in the United States complain about is just the sorry state of infrastructure in this country. You know, the fundamental situation, the economic context, I think, is so different because, you know, China is, of course, a developing country. It's rising economically. And in the United States, infrastructure is really a question of things getting too old. You know, the infrastructure in the United States is aging. Most of it was built in the 1950s, 60s, some of it even earlier. So, you know, it's very common to hear people complain about, you know, for instance, potholes in the roads or the state of public transportation. I mean, I think that's one of the things that people, you know, are really upset about because it affects their day-to-day life in such a significant way. Both travel within cities, but I think to an even greater extent, travel between different cities. You know, there's a lot of debate about infrastructure in the United States, and it's widely considered to be one of the issues where there's broad agreement between people who vote for Democrats and people who vote for Republicans, or Republican Party politicians and Democratic Party politicians. So infrastructure has been one of the main priorities of the Biden administration. They passed what's popularly referred to as the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the United States. And so the administration is touting this as sort of like this is a huge historic breakthrough that's finally going to fix infrastructure in the United States. But I think there's really reason to be skeptical about that. So the bill on its face, you know, the headlines in the media was $1.2 trillion. The United States government is going to invest $1.2 trillion in different infrastructure projects, wide range of different things, roads, bridges, ports, water, which is a huge issue in the United States. But really, I think it's important to keep in mind that that $1.2 trillion figure is really a fake number. So the United States spends a certain amount of money on infrastructure every year. And they added that total to the new spending, the new measures that the Biden administration is implementing. So the majority of that $1.2 trillion was going to be spent already. $650 billion was already going to be budgeted. So really, there's $550 billion of new infrastructure investment. But that figure is for 10 years. That's $550 billion spent over 10 years. So rather than thinking, oh, the United States is about to spend $1.2 trillion on infrastructure, the real number is like $55 billion a year. I think that the US government, frankly, isn't taking this problem seriously, even though they know it's a serious problem. And they just don't want to make the type of public investment because, in large part, because they don't want to generate those resources by taxing wealthy people or corporations. So it's a major, major issue in US society. So how has it changed in China in recent years? I think that's another thing that is really in people's consciousness in the U.S. that public transportation is being built out, you know, rapidly constructed. So I'm curious, have you seen any significant changes in how public transportation works in the country?
That's a quite interesting question. I believe the public transit in China can list on the top tier in the world. Because China has a very huge population, so we consider cities with less than 3 million population to be small cities. So almost every city pays very good attention to public transit. For the past 40 years, everything is going pretty well, and everything is changing rapidly. For example, my mom. My mom graduated from the college in 1988. She is from Harbin, which is like the one of the city in the north of China, and she got a job in Hainan province, which is like at the very down south. She took almost like 1 to 2 weeks from north to south. But today, if you want to go from Harbin to Hainan, maybe it's a 2 days trip. It's a 2 days trip, and you can buy ticket online. You can get all your trains connected. So that's how things changed in China for the last 40 years. I live in Shanghai, one of the biggest cities in China. Shanghai buses daily passenger volume is around 4 million. The Shanghai Metro's daily passenger volume was more than like 10 million. More than 500,000 people take trains to the rest of the country from Shanghai every day. More than 300,000 people fly from Shanghai to everywhere every day. So it requires like careful planning and management. Every little problem can cause trouble for thousands of people. Almost all the public transit, doesn't matter if it is an airplane or a bus. They're all connected to the commanding center through different apps. So you don't miss a flight, and you know when is the next bus coming. One thing is that public transit doesn't work for 24 hours in China. Most of them stop after midnight. So they have plenty of time to do the repair and maintaining and the upgrading. Most of public transportation is operated by state-owned enterprises, but there is also private sector involvement. So here's the deal. The technology for the management of public transportation and public transportation requires innovation. So we can have private sector to compete in this part, the innovation part. However, the private companies seek profits. And if they are allowed to manage public transportation directly, it will raise people's daily expenses. The government and state-owned companies don't have that kind of problem. They don't have to worry about it. And in addition, public transportation needs careful management because it is the blood vessels of the city. So like everybody has only one brain, right? So it's transportation management. It is difficult for the private sector to do the same because the core value of market economy is competition. So that's pretty much how the public transit in China work. So how about the things in the US? How does public transit work in the US?
Right. Well, it's primarily managed at the municipal level, and it varies widely across cities. Some cities that have, substantial resources might have an okay public transportation system, but others might be very underfunded. Some might be relatively affordable, but in other cities, the costs might be very high. So that's one feature of it, that it's a decentralized system. There is a federal Department of Transportation in the U.S., but it's not centralized in the same way that you're describing in China. Public transportation can be quite expensive. For instance, I live in Philadelphia. It costs $2.25 to take the train one way, where, a small amount for one trip, right? But if you're commuting to and from work every single day, if you're a working class person without a high wage job, it can add up. Another issue is unevenness in terms of the quality of public transportation. Like, it's not uncommon for you to be waiting for a bus and it just doesn't really come, or maybe it comes very late. So there's a lot of problems, a lot of unevenness there. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot more support from the federal government for these local public transportation systems. But that money is actually starting to run out now. So most cities have not had fare increases. The cost of public transportation has remained relatively stable, but that may change in the coming years as this federal support, the national government withdraws some of its support for these local systems. So people, I would say in general, really do not like transportation. Travel between cities is even worse. So I take Amtrak to get to work, which is the between cities rail system in the U.S. The maximum speed for an Amtrak train is about 80 miles an hour. I think that's 130 kilometers per hour. So it takes a long time to get places, and it's very expensive. Amtrak is sort of a semi-private, it's essentially a private company that has a formal official relationship with the government. And so they have this variable pricing system that's very unpredictable. It could be relatively affordable, but for instance, if you're trying to get between New York and Washington, D.C., and you're buying a ticket, a day or two ahead of time, that could cost more than $100. So it's really expensive. It's really inconsistent, I would say.
Actually, since you mentioned about Biden's bill, do you have any major project mentioned in this bill, in this plan?
Sure. Well, I think that it's much less prominent. There are, for instance, expensive projects to build a new tunnel into New York City. There's projects to build new roads, highways, bridges. But in terms of a single big ticket mega project that would really catch people's attention, not so much. It's really more focused on repairs. Because there's such an urgent need for that in the United States. It's very dangerous, the state of infrastructure in the U.S. For instance, bridges. About a third of bridges, by some estimates in the United States, are in need of repair. They were built so long ago. And every once in a while, there's a tragic bridge collapse and people are injured. Sometimes large numbers of people die. So it's really sort of addressing a crisis of infrastructure in the United States is primarily what it's focused on. It's not so much focused on economic development. Let me give you one other example. One aspect of the infrastructure plan that's getting a lot of attention in the United States is around water. The pipes that the U.S. water infrastructure system relies on, very old. A lot of them have lead in them. So the water supply in many cities is actually poisonous. And racism in the United States has a lot to do with that. So take, for instance, the city of Jackson, Mississippi. This is the capital of the state of Mississippi in the U.S., and it's a majority black city. And the water is so dangerous that for a period of time, residents were actually not able to drink the water that came out of their faucets. There was a boil water notice, meaning that people had to actually boil the water before they could use it to get rid of the impurities, the poison essentially that was in it. And that's because the water infrastructure was so neglected, so deprived of investment, because Jackson is a majority black city in a state that has a state level government, which is responsible for the water infrastructure, that's notoriously racist. So all of these different political dynamics, all of these different inequalities in U.S. society are reflected in infrastructure as well. Another big piece of the conversation in the U.S. Infrastructure debate is environmental sustainability. I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about that. How does the environment factor into planning for infrastructure in China?
We also take environmental issues into account, such as climate change. That is why we're making a big effort for clean energy, including hydroelectric power, wind power, solar power, and so on. And we have really achieved remarkable results. It is a culture thing for the Chinese government, doesn't break a promise. When they say decarbonization, they mean it, and will achieve what they promise, step by step. In 2020, China's carbon emissions were reduced by 48.4% compared to the number in 2005, exceeding the target of reducing carbon emission intensity by 40% to 45% by 2020, as promised to the international community. I want to mention another thing is that, let me put it in this way, since the current relation between China and the United States is not very good. So the American media selectively reports on the bad things about China, so do the Chinese media. For those Chinese who have been following American news, well, they are very aware of the current infrastructure crisis in the US. Like roads are broken, trains are shaking on the rails, and bridges are falling apart, and apartments are collapsing, like the apartment collapsed in Florida. So especially in New York City, it used to be like a dream for every city designer and developer in China. Well, in China, we even had a television program called 北京人在纽约, Beijinger in New York. It is about a Chinese musician giving up his middle-class life in the Chinese capital city and immigrated to the US to chase American dream. Even viral, it was a blockbuster in China. Sadly, like 30 years later, China has changed a lot and New York is still that New York in the show. The airports, the subway, still the same, even older and full of like rats and trash.
And this was another episode of China Now, a show that opens a window to the present and future of the Asian giant. Hope you enjoy and see you next time.